Porto is ruining the game right now. Porto Z is stupid. Porto X is literally brain dead. Don't understand why every single Porto needs to be nerfed. Today, we're going to be talking about the most controversial fruit in the history of Blox Fruit's PvP. It's probably one of, if not the most overpowered fruit that has not only never received a proper nerf since its release, but actually got buffed through a rework. A fruit that has mobility more useful than light, more support potential than ice or rumble, and more survivability than some of the tankiest transformations in the game, combined with its viability in both ground and air PvP, has led to years of division within the PvP community. Its supporters say that it's a skill-based fruit that requires practice to be good, while anyone else would think that it's completely brain-dead and encourages cowardly playstyles. So today, we're going to be looking at the Porto fruit, or should I say door fruit, and its journey throughout the history of Blox fruits, its impact on the PvP community, and why it was and still remains to be a very controversial fruit for so long. On September 11, 2021, Porto was released under the name of the door fruit in an update that would heavily change the meta back then. Update 15 included not only the very first version of the Porto fruit, but also 6 other fruits as well as a brand new C called the third C, which is still the most advanced and the last stage of progression in Blox fruits up to this day. Door was a rare natural type Blox fruit that costed less than 1 million belly, which made it very accessible even for players who were less rich and couldn't buy any of the overpowered mythical fruits like the new Venom fruit or even the Dragon fruit. At first, the community didn't really think much of the newly released door fruit. After all, the PvP environment was completely different back then. Fruits that focused on maximum damage, such as Dragon or Venom, were considered to be the best fruits for how they could melt the entire health bar of enemies in one combo. Fruits that focused on stun, like Rumble or Dark, were also dominating the meta because of how good they were paired with Pole V2, which was considered to be the best sword back then. Plus, a lot of fruits released in the same update were definitely not the best, like Kilo, Diamond, Falcon, which were all really bad back then. So people thought that door was just like those fruits, belonging to the mediocre tier. It wasn't until a week or two later that the top ladder competitive players began discussing the possibility that door might not be as bad as they thought. At that time, the fruit was almost always seen with Electric Claw and Tushita, which were all great when paired with Sword main. Door simply acted as a support fruit, but it turned out to have perfect synergy with the build. For the average Blox Fruits player though, it had to wait until next year before Door was considered to be part of the meta. A few updates passed after Door's release, and on March 12, 2022, many fruits would receive balance changes in Update 17 Part 2. Anti-cheat was given a major buff, aimbotting was significantly nerfed with the addition of a new mechanic that caused Guns' M1 attacks to deal less and less damage the more hits in a row, and the suspicious kill system was enhanced to trigger more accurately. But the most important changes were the nerfs that the meta received. Venom now costs a quarter of the Fury meter when transforming, Dragon was rebalanced, and the one that suffered the most from this update had to be Pole V2. The hitbox and stun of its Z move was greatly reduced. The nerf that Pole V2 received could be compared to Dragonheart's nerf in today's time, falling from the best sword to struggling to be classified as meta anymore. The Venom and Dragon changes dealt a noticeable blow to the Beast Fruit meta, and the Pole V2 nerf dealt an even heavier blow to the Stun Fruit meta. However, these changes proved to be beneficial for Door. It was around this time that Door's users rate peaked. Almost half of all servers had at least one Door user. Of course, it wasn't as prominent as one of the meta fruits of today like Porto or Kitsune, but remember, Door was just a rare fruit, whereas Porto and Kitsune are legendary and mythical respectively. In May of 2022, exactly 8 months after Door was released, 2 YouTube videos were released that would get over 1.6 million views combined together. One from JMQT and one from Fer999. One thing that these 2 videos had in particular was that they were putting the spotlight on Door. Fer was a very influential YouTuber to PvP back then and remains to be the most recognized PvP YouTuber to this day. Whereas JMQT was less known as a YouTuber, but his Door gameplay video got 1.3 million views. Let's start with Fer999 first. Her video showcased the build with E-Claw, Door, Kabocha, and Spiky Trident, using Fruit main. Spiky Trident wasn't the best sword to use with Door though, but since it was new at the time, I guess that was the reason why Fer used it. Anyway, the video featured a one-shot combo that started with E-Claw C, which was very easy to land consistently if the user practiced. Now, for JMQT's video, he also used E-Claw, Door, and Kabocha, but instead, he used Tushida with sword main. His combo was even simpler, using just T-Claw and Tushida to one-shot his opponents. JMQT used Door as a support fruit that wasn't solely for stuns, which was almost never seen before except for maybe Rumble. He took advantage of the mobility Door provides, as well as its survivability and surprise elements provided by the X move. Even if these two videos weren't the only reason for the rising popularity of Door, they definitely had great influence on how people viewed the Door fruit. However, during mid-2022, Door's usage rate began declining. It was especially when Update 17 Part 3 released that Door was no longer seen in the meta. This update revolutionized Blox fruits. It was almost like a revamp to the entire game. New animations, new mechanics, new item types, and most importantly, new meta. It was in Update 17.3 that God Human, Soul Guitar, and Cursed Dual Katana were added, 3 items that would be game-breakingly overpowered back then. On top of those, a new fruit was added, being Leopard, and Do was given an awakening. Both of those fruits were also insanely good and immediately became the undisputed meta. That's not even all. Race Awakenings were added in the same update, making the power creep even scarier. Door was still very viable with Tushida and sometimes Povey too, but it definitely had a dip in usage rate around that time. On December 26, 2022, Update 17.3.5 would be released, introducing the new Portal fruit. Portal was the legendary natural type Blox fruit that served as a replacement to Door to avoid copyright issues with One Piece. Again, it took another week before top ladder players discovered the level of power Portal had. The competitive community was divided. Most people were overjoyed since they could now be destroying servers using the brand new overpowered fruit in the game, but some others find the balancing to be absolutely cooked and that a mere legendary should never be this good. Portal had all of the mechanics Door previously had, paired with a stronger Z move and a new V move. In public servers, the V move will prove to be one of the most overpowered abilities in the game, although it's very much irrelevant in competitive play since most of the time it's banned in organized PvP. For the average player, however, most people didn't know how to use Portal. Most swords at that time was really bad except for a few, and the vast majority of players didn't have the new Cursed Dual Katana. The meta went from Do with Shark to Do with Angel to Leopard with Shark to finally Portal CDK. Back then, Portal was mostly used with God Human, Soul Guitar, and Cursed Dual Katana. Sometimes people would replace God Human with E-Claw and CDK with Tushida, but those were rare. The Portal CDK build was the undisputable meta, comparable to the Dragonheart meta of today before it got nerfed. Portal CDK focused on explosive damage through one-shot combos, whereas the conservative E-Claw Tushida build was built around chipping away opponents' health, similar to Acidum rifle builds. On January 6, 2023, Portal's M1 ability's cooldown would be increased, although this barely influenced its strength. Between Update 18 all the way to Update 20, Portal wasn't changed much. The meta remained to be pairing the Portal CDK meta build with Shark, and occasionally you would see people using the same thing but with Do or Leopard instead. It wasn't until Update 20 that the meta would finally see another great change. On October 21, 2023, the long-anticipated Update 20 would finally release after 8 months of inactivity from the developers. It introduced a complete rework to the sea events and added a new island, a new sword, a new fighting style, 2 new fruits, and plenty of other content. The new sword in question was the Shark Anchor, and the fighting style was none other than Sanguine Art. Update 20 was another major turning point in the history of the Portal fruit because it also introduced reworks to almost every single sword in the game. This is the first time when sword main would truly become meta, and it wasn't even close. Enchantments didn't help with the power creep either. Blessings would buff swords so much that it would feel like an entirely different weapon. It was in this environment that a new build would be born, now known as the Portal TTK meta. The Portal TTK meta consisted of Sanguine Art, Portal, Soul Guitar, and of course, the Truth Triple Katana. At the start, top ladder players used Serpent Bow, but gradually people switched back to Skull Guitar because, well, it's obviously better, and this build was game-breaking. With Update 20's swords rework, the developers showed us what no one was able to foresee, massive hitboxes on swords. If you tried using the old Portal CTK meta, you would be astonished by how skilled it was compared to the modern Portal meta builds. Yes, you heard that right. Portal CDK and skilled in the same sentence. It's not because it's actually skilled, but compared to the current metas, it definitely was. CDK's moves had way smaller hitboxes compared to TTK with Shark Anchor, They also heavily relied on combo starters such as Portal Z or Skull Guitar X. On November 2nd, 2023, the cooldown of the X and V moves would be increased. This of course weakened it, but was still too little for its usage rate to be affected. Anyway, Portal TTK would continue to dominate PvP until competition arrived a few months later. On December 15, 2023, a new most expensive fruit would be released called Kitsune. As the new rarest fruit, Kitsune was designed to be good in every aspect. It has insane speed and damage with moves that have good stun and hitboxes. Kitsune is an interesting fruit though. In my opinion, untransformed Kitsune and transformed Kitsune are almost like two different fruits, requiring completely different playstyles. Untransformed Kitsune requires mastery of movement techniques and precise one-shot combos, whereas transformed Kitsune can literally be used by newborn babies for how brain-dead it is. Transformed Kitsune is way easier to start using, but given enough practice, untransformed is definitely better since it lets you use your fighting style, sword and gun. At the beginning, people were using Kitsune with all kinds of stuff, like God Human or Gravity Cane. A week later, however, top ladder players began experimenting with a new build that featured Sanguine Art, Kitsune, Yama, Soul Guitar, and Kitsune Ribbon. Kitsune's speed buff paired with Kitsune Ribbon's dash buff paired with Yama's ragdolling and support paired yet again with a bug that would let you launch yourself using Soul Guitar's M1 made this glitch significantly better. Pros would learn to master it and abuse it to be essentially untouchable. However, Portal TTK was still simply just better since it was more versatile and easier to use. For Portal to be truly dethroned, it had to wait until next year. During almost the entirety of 2024, there would be no update to the game. Portal TTK remained the meta for the entire year and people were definitely getting bored of it. It wasn't until December 14th, 2024 that things would start changing again. The long-awaited Dragon rework was finally released in Update 24, alongside many other changes. Dragon was an absolute menace to the casual players. At the start, no one knew how to counter it, giving Dragon fully transformed a very high win rate that was further amplified by the less skilled average players. However, Dragon was very irrelevant in the top ladder because of how easy it was to counter once you learn how to do it properly. Portal was also nerfed, although the nerf was relatively small, but one noticeable change was that you can no longer infinitely combo using the V move. Anyway, I want to put the focus on the actual two most important things added that will completely change the meta. The new Diamond rework and the new Dragonheart sword. Diamond rework was phenomenal. It was the first and only time ever since Portal was reworked that a fruit was able to surpass it in power. Diamond was seen in the meta build alongside Sanguine Art, Yama, and Soul Guitar. The build proved to have amazing synergy and dominated the competitive scene for months until Update 26. Diamond was nerfed to the ground in that update, and its usage rate dropped very significantly. It was almost never seen in both competitive and casual play ever since then. In the same update, TTK was nerfed alongside Diamond, making it fall off just enough to not be top 1 anymore, which laid the foundation for the very next meta. Introducing the Dragonheart meta. Sanguine Art, Dragonheart, Soul Guitar, and finally, Portal was back. The build provided extreme versatility. You could play passive or aggressive depending on your own preferences, and either would work just fine. It had the potential for both burst one-shot combos and chip damage that would slowly win you fights. Especially when paired with enchants, the Dragonheart meta was literally unstoppable, or was it? On August 17, 2025, Dragonheart would receive a major nerf, with the Z move no longer breaking Instinct. This dealt not only a very heavy blow to the usage rate of the sword, falling from by far the most used sword to struggling to remain in the top 3 anymore, but also on Portal as a fruit. After all, Portal is a support fruit. If the thing it supports in the first place falls off, it's only natural that the supporter will also take some sort of damage. However, despite the nerf, Portal has by no means fallen from its number 1 spot. It still remains to be the best fruit for PvP to this day, and only time will tell if it will ever be changed. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to like and subscribe as it really means a lot to me. You can also comment down your thoughts on Portal, whether positive or negative, and if you want to learn more about Blox's PvP history, you can go check out this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.